So the conversation about game developers not being capable and so on and so forth is funny to me because I see a lot of gamers in our space today. They comment on developer talent and so on and so forth. Even sometimes some developers will throw shade at other developers in different regards. But there's a comment that stood out in my comment section that I thought was quite interesting to talk about because this actually tries to pit first party developers with developers that are third party developers, or at least developers who have been able to successfully make games that appealed to them. That's usually the case. You'll see it you see it happening. Somebody makes a game that, somebody likes. Oh, that developer is talented. Somebody else makes a game that I can't vibe with. It means they're talented. But is this the case? Let's look at this comment here on my channel because I think it's very important that we take this as a, kind of a perspective that some people hold. Someone commented on this video about A Plague Tale running at 60 FPS and said, I just think these third-party developers aren't talented enough to optimize these games to 60 FPS. Isn't the PS5 compared to a 2080 Ti? No, it's not. That's a misconception. You can compare it more in terms of performance and rasterization power to like a 1060 in a sense. Now, ray tracing, you'd have to say, okay, throw ray tracing in there, but then it has its CPU, it has cooling limitations, and a whole lot of things. If you want to make your game run at 60 FPS on the PS5, you have to make sacrifices like they had to do in A Plague Tale, where they released the first version at 30 FPS, 40 FPS max, and then they went ahead and said, okay, if we want to get to 60 FPS, we're going to have to run these rats at 30 FPS, reduce the foliage and NPC detail. So pretty much a 2080 Ti is capable of doing that at good detail when the PS5 can't. So it's not comparable in a sense. Now, this said, and they continue and said, when you look at Sony's first-party games like Horizon or God of War, even Resident Evil 4 Remake that looks just as good, if not better than Plague Tale, they surely lack talent just like Gotham Knights developers. Now, this comment is one of those takes where I wish this was from someone who actually had experience in developing video games. And even sometimes developers find themselves where they actually fall into that same trap. Like just the other day, people were talking about Starfield on Twitter, and a developer who, has developed and worked on, I think it's like an indie game that's in early access, was even trashing the gameplay demo that was actually shown for Starfield. They said, this is based on this video, somebody was posting about this stuff, there's a whole Xbox era thing going on right now. I'm seeing it on the internet, but I was just reading the responses, and this developer said the demo was running at 20 FPS with mediocre gameplay. There's no conspiracy. And people were like, well, optimization and all that stuff, but what's interesting though is if you think about the way the comments sounded, it just seemed to me like, there was a little bit of shade being thrown. And I know for the most part, game devs hardly comment about other people's games. And when they do, it's usually slightly inappropriate because, they're in the industry together. They understand some of the circumstances and so on and so forth. But a lot of people carry these notions around. They carry these things around thinking, okay, Ben, because one team can, do a game this way, another team is not doing it this way, then hence everything must be done the same. What's funny is this developer, their game that they're actually developing is an RC car game, basically. It's a racing game. So not even a game that's going to be half as ambitious as Starfield. And so when they're talking about something like that, I think somebody in the comments said, man, sit down. You're developing an RC car game, so we don't want to hear anything about it, which I thought was kind of funny. But again, that's just internet drama. But we need to revisit this comment and see what's going on. So let's talk about the circumstances within which these games are going to be developed. So number one, if you're developing a first-party game, everybody and their mom knows that you have an advantage to be developing this game for one machine. You're going to be optimizing it for one machine, maybe two, basically a second machine that you probably already have experience developing for years. And then all you have to worry about is just to pretty much go in and make sure that your game is going to be following the already established, principles and already established practices that you already have in your ecosystem to get this game to run. And you do that, and at the end of the day, you come out with a really good-looking game where you've been able to have your game engine, a proprietary engine that is actually designed specifically to run this engine in the best, possible light, and then you're pretty much golden at the end of the day. There is no reason why your game should not be top-notch or the best, in my opinion anyways, in every category that you're going to be, because you're basically developing for one console. You start development from day one all the way till the end, worrying about just one thing. In fact, if I would argue, I would think that Sony's first-party studios should be pushing out games much faster because, in my opinion, compared to somebody who has to develop for the Series X, Series S, and even the PC platforms, their workload seems, and this is my opinion, it's not definitive, but I think if we kind of like use common sense, your workload is a little bit the same. Think about Callisto Protocol, right? Callisto Protocol is running one way on the PS5, running really good. Sony was able to provide, some assistance with mocap teams and so on and so forth, right? And, but then having to make another console version put a little bit of strain on you. Your release date and everything is out there. And then you have the PC version that you have to take into account. When you think about the PC versions, which as EA's Respawn Studio basically helped us realize, you don't have a one-fit solution for every gaming PC. You actually don't. Elden Ring came out, and that was a little busted as well. It was popping in, it was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And so, yes, ideally, you're going to see those challenges show up unless the development teams are given extra time to be able to go ahead and do it. Now, this is also the reason why you see that most development teams will have another studio do their PC version of the game, which basically helps out. Say something like QLOC, who makes Mortal Kombat and a lot of Warner Brothers ports for the PC version, while the developers stick with the console versions and so on and so forth. Or Iron Galaxy, who have done a lot of PC ports for a lot of different game developers. So this is pretty much something that's out there, that if a development studio is basically doing a lot of the work themselves, they're going to be seeing some of those challenges unless they're given extra time and resources and experience to get the job done. So to chalk that up to lack of talent, in my opinion, is short-sighted in looking at the logistics as, to how game development is, pretty much made. And I can understand, Sony's first-party games are designed to impress. So, they have a lot of the industry in their pocket thinking that this is basically the only way you should make video games. But a lot of people don't play, on Sony's, platforms. There are a lot more people that you won't believe it, but there are a lot more people that are now playing on the PlayStation than are playing on the PlayStation overall. I know it's crazy, isn't it? But that's just the reality. So many people are not necessarily, into games like that. But at the end of the day, once you can understand these logistical aspects, I think it makes a whole lot of sense when it comes down to, how these video games are made and so on and so forth. And before I even end this video, I'll go ahead and throw another one out there. You see, a lot of gamers act like this is the first time in gaming history that we've been seeing games launch, in poor states. But what I usually argue is I think gamers either have short-term memory, or because it didn't affect them when it happened, they don't necessarily think it ever could or ever did happen. Arkham Knight is one that is a beloved game of many of us that have watched, the Video Game Fight School channel. We've had most of you came here because of the Batman games and the comic book games. But many of you don't realize that Arkham Knight had one of the worst ports on PC after it was released. It was crashing. It was developed, I think, by Iron Galaxy or so. I can't remember who did the development, but it basically had a very poor launch when it came out. It was so poor, they took it down from the Steam page, the Steam store. And if you kept your copy, according to some people at the time, they gave you a free version of Arkham City and a free version of Arkham Asylum. That's how bad the port for Arkham Knight was at launch. So this is something that studios have always struggled with whenever they're making third-party games. Would this comment that said that these, third-party studios are not talented ever make that comment towards Rocksteady? There's no way they'll ever make that comment. You won't survive the barrage of memes that are going to be thrown your way. But, as much as we may try to chalk it up, even though it was another studio that worked on the port, Rocksteady is still, responsible for that game and responsible for that port and responsible for giving the resources that were necessary to be able to get the game working. It's not like they just give it to Iron Galaxy and run away. I mean, at the end of the day, the game director and some people who are in charge of logistics in Rocksteady will still be over those studios. So the buck still stops with them, at the end of the day. So this is a very interesting conversation, and I think at the end of the day is one that must be had because, if we don't necessarily talk about things this way, if we don't, put these things into perspective, people are going to come out here making these statements, saying things like, oh, these developers are talented or their games are mediocre and so on and so forth, and compare them to studios that basically, the people who work there, are working in much more, streamlined conditions than say the people who are working in other studios that are going to have to make a game for 3 different or more. Because on a PC is not just one platform. It's a plethora of different possibilities in terms of hardware. You just have to, basically, in a sense, hope that you can spec your game just right to be able to get the job done. Because even 2 people with similar builds may have different experiences sometimes based on different hardware manufacturers. So I just wanted to make this video just to go ahead and kind of put this in perspective in a conversation. I'm not really a fan of calling people, talentless. It doesn't really sound, in a sense, productive to me. I think maybe you can say possibly we may need to start looking at how time is managed, among developers, how their studio managers are managing time, how they're actually directing their teams, how they're spending time. Are they having these guys in meetings, or are they actually having them develop games? That's another thing too. A lot of times you see developers on Twitter making fun of meetings. Oh, we have these meetings, but are these meetings taken out of development time that they could be using? Is, somebody out there actually wisely investing in their developers and encouraging them and supporting them and motivating them? It's not easy to do something like this. Everybody just comes out to say, oh, yeah, this guy did it, so, this other guy must be able to. But, at the end of the day, maybe you would do a better job, but why are you here on YouTube? Maybe you should go apply to run those studios and make better games, possibly. This is probably going to maybe change the industry. At the end of the day, who knows? Or at the end of the day, it's just one of those things where, we just probably stay away from games that we don't want to deal with if they're not meeting our requirements, and, support games that meet our requirements. And if that means, supporting Sony's first party games, then so be it. If that means supporting Capcom's games, then so be it. Because, those games, they seem to have a little bit more, of their priorities set in place. But again, when you hear about Western developers and, developers in the East, yeah, their conditions are not necessarily the same in terms of how they work. You need to look at those conversations and see how Western developers, in a sense, shriek when they look at the conditions Eastern developers usually have to work in. And, this is not unknown. This is something that's really big out there. So I guess that's a whole different conversation, but we'll probably get into that very soon. Thanks so much for watching the video, and hopefully, we can chat soon about this stuff. Peace out.